And today we're going to go ahead and install brake pads and rotor. The first thing you want to do is get the vehicle on a flat surface, put your jacks underneath it, secure it underneath the frame. Next step I usually do is I go ahead and pop your cap off your brake fluid reservoir, because when we go ahead and compress the caliper, the fluid level is going to rise. What I usually do is get the tools laid out. And so to remove your tires, of course, these vehicles come with little plastic caps. They're like 7/8 little plastic caps. I just use a cordless drill, pop them off, and then up underneath them, these are 22mm nuts that hold the rims to the hub. Remove that, and that exposes your rotor and your brake pad, caliper bracket, the whole assembly for the front right here. And what we're going to do is go ahead and remove this bolt right here and the one down here. They're 19mm. When we go ahead and remove this, it's going to expose the brake pads, the rattle clips. What I usually do is set this guy off to the side, and then because we're going to replace this rotor, they requested the rotor gets replaced. There's 18mm brake caliper bracket bolts right there, and you got one above on top. We're gonna go ahead and pull those. We're gonna pull those four bolts out, and that should totally expose it to where the rotor is gonna come right off with the deal. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove this, and then we'll go ahead and remove the brake caliper bracket, and then we're gonna remove this one little torque head, and that's a T30, that's right here. So I'm gonna go ahead and get that removed and get it ready for the new parts. You should be able to remove your brake caliper like so. Just set it off to the side, because you're going to get to them later. And here's your brake pads. It's got a little meat left on it. We'll go ahead and replace it with Brake Best Select. The next step, what I usually do is go ahead and remove the brake caliper bracket bolts. And that, of course, is a 18mm. Now I usually go ahead and just turn the whole spindle assembly so I can access these bolts real easy. That pretty much drops that. Of course, these are anti-rattle clips. You get two per side. And this brake set comes with new ones and new brake pads. So I go ahead and always replace the anti-rattle clips with new brake pads when installing new pads. That's what I highly recommend. Keep the bolts together. And then your next deal is this little bitty T30. Put it on a cordless drill, and usually pops right out. Sometimes they do become a problem and they don't want to come out. So what you could do is go ahead and grab a punch and tap it with the hammer, and that usually shocks it and releases it. So once you go ahead and do that, this whole rotor will go ahead and pop off. And that exposes your hub assembly. And while you have it exposed, you always check to hear if it grinds, makes any noise. Check to see if it wiggles, and inspect the whole assembly. With the brake caliper, this is a dual piston caliper. A lot of vehicles you actually have a single piston, in which the parts store actually sells a disc brake a brake caliper compression tool. It'll look something like this, which works great on a lot of the single pistons, but because this is a dual piston, I usually use 2 C-clamp. I put the brake pad back in here and I compress it evenly with these C-clamps, and it works really well. But usually I just go ahead and slap a brake pad back in here, and then I C-clamp here and here and run them both up until it's all compressed all the way. Makes it pretty easy. So it'd be something like this. So you'll just run this in a little bit, run this in, try to keep it even until it's flush. Once it's flush, back these back off, and then we'll go back to installing a new rotor, followed by the brake caliper bracket. And with the bolts, you want to go ahead and put thread locker on there, and that'll prevent the bolts from rattle themselves out. So I always put thread locker on these bolts when reassembling brake components. I'm going to go ahead and compress those in, and it should be flush. As you can see, the C-clamps are all the way compressed in, which pushes the piston all the way in. And this is what you're looking for. Flush all the way. Can't turn it no more. Nope. She's ready to roll, so I go ahead and remove the C-clamps. And with the other side, and she's ready to reinstall. Installed the new rotor assembly, and I went ahead and put the screw back inside that holds the rotor to the hub. This is a T30, and now that I have the brake caliper bracket, the brake pads come with new anti-rattle clips, so I'll go ahead and reinstall the anti-rattle clips. They just snap right into the brake caliper bracket assembly, like so. There's the old ones. And as far as this, inspect it. Make sure it's able to move freely. You want to make sure they move freely on both sides. Usually what I do is I go ahead and pop them off, and then I dip it in a high temp grease, and I place it back in the deal. And I make sure I pull the boot back into its place so it can move freely. If there's any drag on it, grease her up. That way it can move freely. When you go ahead and hit the brakes, the caliper moves back and forth. It goes back to its spot. And then once I go ahead and prep that, it's ready to reinstall here. I go ahead and get the bolts. These are the brake caliper bracket bolts. I go ahead and put some lock thread on there, and I get it prepped and ready. And of course, we're going to go ahead and put the brake caliper bracket, bolt it down, then the caliper will follow by the brake pads. So went ahead and placed the brake caliper bracket assembly back in its place with these 2 bolts right here. There again, it's 18mm bolts that hold the brake caliper bracket in place. And now I got the new pads here. If you actually pay close attention, this pad actually has a flat line. This one's got a curve. So that tells me that this right here holds flat up against the pistons itself. And these pads right here are towards the front. This lines right here, it's actually these lines right here. This is on the front side of the caliper. The pistons are in the back side of the caliper. So of course you got the round deals right here. So these go in the back, these go in the front. And we'll go ahead and place those in right now. And then we're going to go ahead and bolt the caliper back in its place. And she should be ready on this side, then we'll do the same on the other. All right, got the brake caliper back on. Bolt right here is 19 millimeter again, and this one's 19. And remember I was telling you about greasing the shaft right here, the high temp grease that they got right here. Is, if you watch closely, it moves. See how it moves? That's what you want. It should have it should not be stuck in one position. This right here, this little slide pins that go inside, they move. And that's what you want. So when you hit the brakes, they compress. When you release the brakes, they release and move back and let the rotor go so you can move freely. So ensure that these shafts right here are greased, and then you go ahead and put some lock thread on the bolt here when slapping this back on, and she should be ready to go. On the driver's side, it's going to pretty much be just like what we first started on the passenger side. Brake caliper, they're on the back side of the wheel, both left and right. And of course you have the two bolts that run on the top and bottom that removes your brake caliper assembly. Go ahead and place that in the back. I usually lay it on top of the control arm, and you're going to go ahead and press your pistons. Of course, you put the brake pad in there and use both C-clamps until the pistons are flush. And you go ahead and remove the front brake pads, along with removing your anti-rattle clips, because you get new ones. Like so. And if you go ahead and remove the rotor, you do the same thing like we did on the other side. You remove your brake caliper brackets, 18 millimeter bolts in the back, slide that off, and then you got your bolt right here, little T30. Remove that and your rotor will come off just like the other side. Once you go ahead and reassemble everything, you're going to go ahead and then come back to ensure you have the proper amount of fluid. In this case, this one's pretty much all the way to the top. And then you're going to go ahead and pump your brake pedal until it gets hard. You do not leave with the vehicle until this brake pedal has been pumped and it is hard to the press. Once it's hard, go ahead and fire the vehicle up. She should be ready to go. And then you can enjoy the vehicle. But that is pretty much how you go ahead and do a brake pad and rotor installation. This is pretty much how it should look. Rotor pad installed. Make sure you use thread locker on the bolts in the back. Then go ahead and put your tire back on with your lug nuts, torque them down the manufacturer spec, and then your little plastic cap. And hope you enjoyed the video.